excuse me, in 1858, Abraham Lincoln was challenging Stephen Douglas for the Illinois Senate seat. He decided he wanted to run. Abraham Lincoln had been in the House of Representatives representing Illinois as a Whig candidate. He was a member of the Whig Party, but as the Whig Party folded and the rise of the Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln became a Republican. And Stephen Douglas is a Democrat. Stephen Douglas is the incumbent for the Senate seat and a heavy favorite in this election. So, going from the House to the Senate would be a step up for Abraham Lincoln if he were able to win this election. However, Lincoln knew that it was a long shot. Stephen Douglas was popular in his home state, although, as we know, not so popular in the South because of the Lecompton Constitution, tearing that up in the Senate after they did the vote for popular sovereignty. But really, when push comes to shove, it doesn't make any difference how the South feels about Stephen Douglas when he's running for the Illinois Senate seat, because it's only Illinois people that vote in this election. However, it will have lasting impacts down the road later on in the presidential election. So these two men, as often happens even today, they had debates. We're fresh off the presidential election of 2020, and we saw many debates. This debate here between Lincoln and Douglas, well, they had them at a lot of different places, but the most well-known happened at Freeport, Illinois, at Knox College, as you can see in the sketch here. Abraham Lincoln shows his creativity by backing Douglas into the corner by asking him a really, really tough question. And Abraham Lincoln knew exactly what he was doing. He asked Stephen Douglas in this public debate, can the people in a territory legally vote down slavery, even though the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott case has come out and said slavery's open everywhere? So, just reminder here that Stephen Douglas is the author of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, where he proposed popular sovereignty for the Kansas and Nebraska territories as a way to entice the South to vote for it, if you remember. So he's a supporter of popular sovereignty, letting the people vote for slavery. So once again, the question, can the people in a territory legally vote down slavery, even though the Dred Scott case, the Supreme Court has ruled that slavery is open everywhere? So it really backs Douglas into a corner, because if he goes along with the Dred Scott case and says, oh yeah, now that the Dred Scott case has come forward, now slavery's open everywhere, the people of Illinois will freak out because they're a free state, and he would, in all likelihood, lose the president of the Senate seat to Lincoln if he supports the Dred Scott case, because of the free state of Illinois. Illinois wouldn't vote for him. Now, Lincoln's no dummy. He realizes that, and he has his eye on the prize, meaning the presidency, 2 years down the road. And he was pretty sure that he would be up against Stephen Douglas. So when Douglas came out in what became known as his Freeport Doctrine, because the first one was here at Freeport, he said that, yes, the people in a territory can vote down slavery through popular sovereignty. So in effect, he went against the Dred Scott case, and he supported his doctrine of popular sovereignty, which, to win this election, he had to do. So Stephen Douglas ends up winning his seat back. He will continue on in Senate. He defeats Lincoln here. However, fast forward 2 years down the road, when Lincoln was right, the two are going to square off for the presidency. And when the South doesn't support him, it's going to cause problems. And it's going to lead to Abraham Lincoln winning the election of 1860 for the presidency. So he lost the battle, so to speak, here, the Senate seat, but he wins the war, which is the presidency 2 years down the road. Interesting. Lincoln, very creative. Now, when it came to these two men debating, they were complete polar opposites. Abraham Lincoln was tall, 6'4", very tall for his day. It was, to see someone who was 6'4" in 1858 was like seeing the equivalent of seeing somebody today that's over 7 foot. You just don't see a lot of people that are over 7 foot. You didn't see a lot of people at that time that were over 6'4" or around 6'4". Stephen Douglas was approximately 5'6", so very short. But at the time, even short during 1858, but not abnormally short. Today, that'd be pretty short. Times have changed. Douglas was a sharp dresser. Lincoln had a couple different suits, and that was it, because he couldn't just walk in anywhere and buy a suit because he was so tall. They didn't make suits, that he had to have them special made. So completely different. Abraham Lincoln was a creative speaker, not a great speaker. Didn't have that booming voice, whereas Douglas did. So they were opposite, but really Lincoln gets the better of him in these debates. Even though it doesn't lead to the Senate seat, it does lead to the presidency 2 years down the road. Okay, talk about John Brown again. I talked about him in part one. The Pottawatomie Creek, he's the one who hacked apart 5 pro-slavery people, but didn't suffer any consequences for that. No jail or anything, because it was the Wild West. But in 1859, John Brown had a plan. He believed, as I said before, that he was sent by God to free the slaves. He led a rebellion to Harper's Ferry, which is located in Virginia. It was actually located in Virginia, but today it would be West Virginia, because West Virginia is going to break off from Virginia. And he was able to take hold of a federal arsenal up there, which housed many weapons that he wanted to use, pass out to his followers, and go free all the slaves in the South. He fully believed that God would alert the surrounding slaves who would come up there and help him take over the armory, and he would pass out the guns to them. Well, the slaves didn't get the message, but the United States military did, led by, interestingly enough, Robert E. Lee. They surrounded Harper's Ferry and captured John Brown, arrested him, put him on trial, found him guilty, and they put him to death by hanging. That he became a martyr for the cause. People in the North were furious that Virginia had hanged John Brown. They didn't know much about Pottawatomie Creek. They didn't know much about what happened here at Harper's Ferry, where a number of people were killed by Brown. But to Northerners, he was a hero because he wanted to free the slaves. So, but at the end of the day, his death is going to really spark anger and resentment in the North. That's going to, is really going to move the country more toward civil war. So the statement here that I have here, it was much more important to anti-slavery people dead than alive. John Brown was, because he became a martyr, a rallying point for their cause. So yeah, interesting, because Robert E. Lee becomes the commander-in-chief of the rebel army, the Confederates later on. So, but he was, obviously there's no secession at this point, so he's a member of the U.S. military, and very well-respected member of the U.S. military. Okay, so let's talk about the election of 1860. I briefly mentioned it a few minutes ago, and Abraham Lincoln is going to be going as a Republican. But before that, let's talk about Stephen Douglas as the Democrat candidate. That the South hated the nomination of Stephen Douglas as the Democrat candidate to run in 1860. So they made a show of it. They walked out of the nominating convention. The Southern Democrats did. All the representatives from the South stood up as soon as Douglas was nominated, and they walked out. A couple weeks later, they had their own nominating convention, and they broke off and nominated their candidate, a man by the name of John C. Breckinridge, who was a slave owner. So by splitting the party, it doomed the Democrats. It's political suicide by doing that, because you split the votes. Think of it this way: you have 100 voters, and 50 of them are Democrat and 50 of them are Republican, and the Democrats split off into two. and they go like Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats, and the Northern Democrats say 25, the Southern Democrats 25, but the Republicans still have 50. The Republicans are going to win the election. So that's going to be a big part of what happens here. So yeah, the split of the party is going to really hinder the Democrats in this election. And so this is how it broke down on who's competing against who in this election. The Northern Democrats led by Stephen Douglas, the Southern Democrats led by John C. Breckinridge, splitting the party. You have the Republicans nominate Abraham Lincoln, and he wants to stop the spread of slavery. He doesn't come out and say he wants to end slavery because that was the Republican view. They knew that, as I said in part one, is that if they ever came out and said they want to end slavery outright, they get no support from the South or the middle states. So they said, we want to stop the spread of slavery. Don't let it go into the territories. They were for a protective tariff and free homesteads. So they had these, but then you throw another candidate, guy by the name of John Bell, who's a member of a brand new political party called the Constitutional Unionist Party. And this was out of desperation that they created this party. And they are all about compromise. They say, hey, we cannot go down this path because it's going to lead to war and the breakup of the Union, and it's going to be disastrous. So they're all about compromise. John Bell is their standard bearer. So this political cartoon screams, that just dividing up the votes isn't going to be good overall. It's a picture of Bell, Breckinridge, and Douglas, and it says too many cooks, and it comes from the old adage that too many cooks spoil the broth, meaning that if everybody puts in their ingredients into the soup's going to taste awful. So here's what it means here, is that Bell, Breckinridge, and Douglas are going to split the votes. All the votes are going to go in all different directions, and it's going to lead to Abraham Lincoln winning the election, which absolutely it is. Take a look at these interesting results of the election of 1860. Let's first look at the popular vote. Abraham Lincoln wins 40% of the popular vote only. 40%. Second in the popular vote was Douglas with 29%. Third in the popular vote was Breckinridge with 18%. And coming in fourth in the popular vote was Bell with 13%. But it really doesn't matter what those vote counts are. It's all about what happens in the Electoral College. Abraham Lincoln wins 180 electoral votes, which represented 59% of the electoral vote, which, as you know, once you get over 50%, you're declared the winner. So he's declared the winner of the election. But you look at some of the other numbers. Second in the electoral vote count was Breckinridge, because he's winning all the green down below here. He's winning all these deep South states, and he's gathering up the electoral votes to get 72. And then next in the electoral vote count was Bell with 39. He's winning the states, there for compromise. And think about why Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia would throw their support behind a compromise candidate. They knew that the majority of the fighting was going to be right in their backyard, and it was going to really tear up their state because they're right on the border between North and South. And you have a lot of supporters from the North that live in Virginia and a lot of supporters from the South. So that's why they're all about compromise. Now, last in the electoral vote was Douglas. And look, he's second in the popular vote. So here's what's happening with Douglas. He's not winning states, but he's winning a lot of votes in states, but not enough to take the states because of too many cooks spoil the broth. Right? So if you go into a lot of these states up here, Douglas is winning a lot of these states. You go to a lot of states down, Douglas is getting a lot of votes, but not winning. I'm sorry. He's getting a lot of votes here. He's getting a lot of votes in the South. He's getting a lot of votes, but not enough to win the state like he did in Missouri and part of New Jersey. But that's it. A lot of votes, but he couldn't close the deal in the states, and he's losing in the electoral college. So just kind of gives you, politically, it's interesting to look at the results of the 1860 election. And we'll get into more detail on this in class. So Abraham Lincoln won despite not even being on the ballot in the South. His 40% represented exactly 0 votes from the Southern states because they refused to put him on those ballots. So, but it doesn't matter. He's going to win enough. He wins over 50% the electoral college. True to their word, South Carolina, who always said if a Republican were elected president, they would immediately secede from the Union. And as soon as Lincoln was elected, South Carolina seceded. Shortly thereafter, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed in the next 6 weeks. The 7 seceders, there were 7 of them, met in Montgomery, Alabama in February of 1861 and created the Confederate States of America. And they chose Jefferson Davis, who was the former Secretary of War under Pierce, if you remember. He became their president. So at this point, you only had 7. The numbers are going to grow even more than that. They're going to grow to 11. There was one last attempt at compromise called the Crittenden Compromise that would extend the 36 degrees 30 line all the way to the Pacific Ocean and to the Atlantic Ocean, but it failed because Abraham Lincoln said the time for compromise is over. He said, we're not going to allow slavery to spread at all, no compromise. So we understand where we're going now. So here's the breakdown right here. There's 11 Confederate states. You can see them all here: Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. There's 11 of them. So you had 20 states that remained in the Union, and they're up here. I'm not going to name off the 20 states, but you could see there. So you got 2 countries, the United States of America up here and the Confederate States of America. President Abraham Lincoln up here, President Jefferson Davis here. They had their own capital. Their first capital was at Montgomery, Alabama. They're later going to move it up here closer to the action to Richmond, Virginia. The Confederates had a Senate and a House and the judicial branch. They modeled their government after the United States government. A big difference was that they allowed slavery. That's one of the things there. So it's on. And that concludes chapter 19.